What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Pack Pride Podcast. I'm your host, Corey Smith, here with two guests this time around. We've got Miles Mastrocola and Brian Geisinger, both basketball analysts for Pack Pride. Wanted to ask you guys, first of all, before you jump into things, how was your Thanksgiving? Miles, I know yours is a bit non-traditional, so I'll start with you there.
Yeah. One of my dad's best friends, his name's Joe Fiore. He throws an annual deal where he's like a general contractor, so he's very hands-on and knows how to build things and stuff like that. He built a rotisserie in his backyard. He puts like 4 turkeys on it. They get a keg or 2 of beer, and everyone brings a side or a dessert. And there's like anywhere from 35 to as many. I remember one year there were like 150 people there. And it is I can't say the word, but a you-know-what show every year. Like, it is just chaos. He's got 2 daughters that are like around my age, and I've known them forever. They're like my sisters, and they have a bunch of friends come over. I have friends come over. It's just a big bash. And I did sit down and work for 3 hours during this. So it was interesting, like with the chaos around me. I didn't even attempt to join the press conference because I knew that I would probably end up making myself look like unprofessional more so than I normally do in these settings. So it is what it is. But it was a great time, and one of those things where if any of our listeners are like, hey, we don't have any place to go for Thanksgiving, like, hit me up, you can come. Just don't come empty-handed. That's the only rule. So it's a wide open invite, and it's fun. It's a good way to do it.
I love it. Brian, how about you, man?
Yeah, well, I feel like I missed out on the main event, but
Brian, pull up next year.
Yeah, next year. All right, and trust me, I know how to bring. I don't show up empty-handed too, so I feel like I've got a standing invite, and I know the cost of admission, so we're good to go here.
Good.
No, it was good. A little more tame. Family's in Winston-Salem, so I went back there for a couple of days, and did the sort of what Miles was saying, like, you try to strike the balance of family time versus trying to stuff in as much hoops as you possibly can. And like, they don't make it easy on you because there's just game after game. And luckily everyone in my family wants to watch games, but I'm trying to like take notes and, tag timestamp plays so I can go back and cut the film later. So it makes it tricky, but it's like a fun tightrope to walk. And I had a great time. I'm a little glad the holiday is at least in the rearview mirror, but it was good to be home and be with friends and family and food for a few days.
Well, I saved mine for last because mine was the least entertaining. I had an 8-year-old at home, or an 8-day-old at home, and a 6-year-old at home. So we stayed in, allowed other people to bring us over leftovers throughout the day from their Thanksgiving festivities, and we just ate at the house. And we still have leftovers today that we're still eating. So we got at least the food part down, but the family stuff will have to wait until probably at least Christmas and then, into next year. So,
Corey, how much trouble would you have gotten in at home if you had snuck away for a cold snack at my Thanksgiving?
A lot.
Good. Also, glad Heather's holding you accountable.
Yeah. My oldest is a little sick right now too. So I couldn't have left. And I probably would have given everybody there the food. So yeah, that's not what you want. But before we get things started, I want to remind our listeners, as always, visit our iTunes and Google Play Store. Give us a rating if you enjoy the podcast and help get the word out there to the rest of Wolfpack Nation. Also, make sure to check out all of Pack Pride's coverage throughout the rest of football. There's, still a bowl game to be played. We'll talk a little bit. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on in December about football. And also basketball now full swing, which is why we're here today. You can either get that for $1 for the first month, or if you sign up through, I believe it's Tuesday night, which is still the Black Friday special, you can get 75% off of Pack Pride when you sign up now. That's an entire year of not only Pack Pride, but also 24/7 Sports Network. So head over to packpride.com to find out more about becoming a premium subscriber. So, guys, let's the reason why we're here, obviously, we could talk about the entire season so far for NC State, 6-1 start, but I think everybody was kind of waiting until the battle for Atlantis, until NC State played, Kansas, and then whoever else ended up being. It ended up being Dayton and then Butler, which was probably one of the more entertaining matchups that I think a lot of people were hoping for. But I'll start with you, Brian. Just your overall thoughts from this. Your maybe your biggest standout from the 3 games as well.
they just looked like a really solid basketball team at all times against 3 good opponents, including one elite opponent that could have probably has a case for being maybe the best team in the country in Kansas. But Dayton's really good. Like that's a well-coached team with Anthony Grant. They've got several NBA prospects on that roster. And for State to go out and defend the way they did in that game and to hold down the 3-point volume from Dayton and to just pound that team in the post with a guy like Deron Holmes, who's one of the best shot blockers and one of the best interior defenders in the country, was just as impressive of a win I've seen NC State have in I don't know how long. They just look like I don't know if any part of them is like completely spectacular. I think someone like Terquavion Smith with his game-breaking scoring ability gives them – there's like some potential for them to jump a level, but right now they're just a solid two-way team. And obviously the offense is like leading the dance. They're top 20 again in offensive efficiency. But defensively, they've held opponents under 1 point per possession in every game this season, except for the Kansas game. But every other game, they've been pretty solid. And maybe this is something we can get into a little bit more at some point on the pod. But I have also been impressed with just the defensive rebounding from this team. They're holding opponents to an offensive rebound rate under 23%. So, 77% essentially defensive rebound rate, which is top 50 nationally. And if you know how much this team switches, which since Kevin Keats got to Raleigh, it's been 1 through 4 on pretty much every screen or most screens, most dribble handoffs and other exchanges. They even switched some 1 through 5, and they've done that at times this season in the non-DJ Burns minutes. No real surprise there. But that is something that can usually hurt a team's defensive rebounding. And historically, State has never been like an elite defensive rebounding team. So we'll see if that keeps up. But like one of a real simple thing you can do to be good defensively is to defensive rebound. There's other stuff. There's like, not fouling, just like real simple stuff on the margins that isn't like maybe exciting to think about or like cool to talk about or whatever, but just solid. So I would say then as far as the performances go, we can talk, more about, I guess, guys like, Casey Morsell and Jarkel Joyner, but I thought they really stood out. Morsell's obviously shooting the leather off the ball and is playing just such a simple, smooth game on offense, and the point of attack defense has been outstanding. And Jarkel is just like as aggressive of a player we have in the ACC right now, looking to get downhill and score. And he hit a shot against Butler, like an and one layup where I swear he was like horizontal with the ground in the first half, and he still managed to get it up on the backboard above Manny Bates for the and one layup. So those two guys I would say jump out, but you could really pick a bunch of different guys. I think everyone's had some moments this season and down in Atlantis.
Miles, your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, like just from a collective standpoint, is like this group, you can kind of feel that they're very, very locked in with one another. And that really pays dividends, especially in a game where you're playing against another high quality opponent. You have also the emotional factor of going up against Manny Bates, a guy that was in the locker room for 4 years. So I think the fact that this team is tight knit, you see it in the play on the floor. You see that Quavion Smith, who's, a high volume, you look at him as an NBA guy, he's probably a 6-man type guy that can come in and score in bunches. He's willing to take a back seat when other guys have it going. And I think that's the biggest thing is State had a really, really good showing in this event. And Terquavion Smith was not his normal self, which is like, obviously you want T to be clicking on all cylinders, and we know he will at some point. But the fact that they're able to do it without him being the dynamic, 25-point-a-game threat that he can be is really, really encouraging. I think the biggest thing is that this team is balanced. They have wings, they have guards, they have bigs. And Mahorchich and Burns did a really, really good job as a tag team duo this week on both ends of the floor. And a lot of people talk about Burns' defensive liability, and we see that at times, but he's held his own and has done his part on that end of the floor. And then obviously what he gives you offensively is a super, super reliable dump down option. And Mahorchich is a guy that is just a bruiser, going to physically wear people down over the course of a game. So I think it's a lot of the things that NC State wanted and needed to go right have went right. Now it's a matter of, is it sustainable? And as of right now, it doesn't look like there's any reason to believe that it isn't.
Yeah, one thing I was going to say that really stood out to me, I mean, I agree with you guys on all fronts, but I was going to say that the biggest thing that stood out to me in this one was the fact that NC State didn't turn over the ball a ton. Obviously, in the game against, you go back to the game against Kansas, where they turned the ball over, 13 times. And a lot of that was on Terquavion Smith, just kind of not making really smart passes, trying to do a little too much with the ball and proving that he can play that point guard position. You saw him really settle down in the last 2 games. And while they had 16 against, I want to say it was Dayton, I think they had 16 turnovers. But again, they won the points off of turnovers in every single game. And that's shows you, again, they're getting back to what you want to see from a Kevin Keats type system. And it's something that was missing, quite frankly, in last year. I mean, obviously they had Darion Sebron and they had, Terquavion Smith, but really that was about it. And you didn't feel confident in anybody that they could dump it down to once they got those turnovers. So it was like, all right, you get it. You got to get down the other side of the court and score. I mean, you saw it in multiple occasions in this tournament where, a guy like Jack Clark would get a turnover and get the ball to the right guy down the other end of the court, whether it was Terquavion Smith, Casey Morsell. You just got so many scoring options in the transition that it can actually work this time around. Whereas, like I said, I mean, hell, Darion Sebron got a defensive rebound last year, or got a turnover last year, and he was trying to figure out how to get it to the other end of the court and score. He wasn't looking for anybody else because he didn't trust in anybody else really at that point. So,
and I was going to say the real quick, Corey, the other thing, and obviously Sebron was such a great player and did a lot for this team last year. It was a tough year, result wise, but when your primary initiator can't make shots, it makes it really, really hard to score in the half court. Now when it's Joyner or Terquavion or LJ Thomas, who came in and played solid minutes, or Breon Pass, who also came in and played solid minutes, all 4 of those guys can raise up and make a shot at any point at anywhere on the floor. And that allows a balance that you just didn't see last year. And obviously Sebron's a dynamic freak of a player, coast to coast demon, and does all this crazy stuff, but it completely changes the way teams have to guard you in the half court when your guys can raise up and hit a shot like that.
That's a great point. Before the season, one of the things I was worried about this team was just what were they going to do to replace the rim pressure of Sebron, because they ate in both transition and secondary and in the half court last season off that guy getting downhill and forcing teams to bend the defense and rotate and then kicking out to Terquavion. Or obviously Terquavion had plenty of magic on his own too. But that really was State's bread and butter was Sebron drive, collapse defense, kick out to Turk. Or Sebron drive, helps Slade, he finishes. And obviously Jarkel is not the same sort of downhill terror that Sebron was. Newsflash, almost no one the last 2 decades of college basketball has been. He was, in terms of the numbers, he was kind of without precedent. But I do think some of that downhill volume, while a lot of it had to do with his skill set, his mentality, part of it too was there's certain shots he just wasn't ever going to take, And every once in a while he'd rise up and take a catch and shoot 3, and it was cool that he was willing to engage with that stuff. Again, Jarkel's he doesn't have the size or the length or the stride length that Darion possesses, but the pull-up shooting that he has, the off-the-catch shooting, and what he's able to do by bending defenses with his pull-up shot or with his ability to slash and get into the paint. Turk's doing the same thing. That's creating these looks for Casey Morsell. Casey Morsell's not going to shoot 50% on 3 for the entire season. It would be cool, but I don't think that's going to happen. But he's getting just great looks off those guys, playing off of them. The one thing I wanted to circle back to real quickly about Smith is just yes, he shoots a lot, and sometimes the shots are from outer space where he just will pull up or shoot off the catch from. But some of that is just baked into the offense. You'll see sometimes Jarkel will bring it up and just be hand the ball off to him and be here, shoot it. We know you're 29 feet from the hoop, but you're pretty much in range. Those deep bombs open everything up. When teams have to be okay, we have to guard this guy out here, you can play inside of that space, which I think is one of the things that does help a little bit replenish the loss of Sebron's rim pressure. But everyone on the team has to buy in and be cool with that. And I know Terquavion is the best player, but one of you guys said it at the jump of just like this team is sort of like solid in their roles. And it does sort of seem like everyone's kind of like bought in and is in on this. And so everyone's got to be cool with him taking those shots. That seems to be the case. It does help too that he passes the ball too. Like he is not just a pure, run and gun shooter, like the 6-man archetype, he is more in like if you're looking at the next level, he's more in like the Jordan Poole, Jordan Clarkson type than just like I don't know if you want to go to the Jamal Crawford, just pure shooter, pure scorer.
Yeah, I'm chucking in 10 minutes. Deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And like he does a nice, like he's got that corner skip pass down. Like he threw a nasty one against Butler to Marcel. He missed the shot, but it was sick. And he's just forcing teams to put 2 on the ball, like either trap or to bring the screen defender up to the level. That's opening guys up on the roll. That's opening up the skip pass. And so that pick and roll game just has more life to it, I think, this year than it has maybe in the last couple of years. And then even going back to basically when Markelle had his fingerprints on the offense. And the second thing I did want to touch on too is just like the centers giving this team something on offense is huge because it's something they haven't had since DJ and Manny were healthy 2 seasons ago. Like last year, I always go back to the UNC game for State in Chapel Hill where UNC, they run this no middle concept in terms of guarding ball screens. They just want to pin the ball on one side of the court. And the best way for you to reverse it is to throw it to the big guy on the roll or the short roll or the pop. And it was just like, you're not going to do that to E.B. Dwana. You're not going to do that with Jalen Gibson. Like those guys are like, they're nice. Like Dwana plays hard as hell. And like, he's a good defender, but like, he can't shoot. He's not out there to like rotate the basketball. And so Leaky Black is just teeing off on those guys, forcing them, funneling them to the sideline. And it's like to be able to have, a guy like Morcic that you can dump the ball to on the roll. He can make a play. You can dump it to him in the post. In Burns, you can do stuff on the short roll or throw it to him in the post. So just like having all 5 guys be a threat offensively is like a huge deal towards raising the floor offensively.
Yeah. And I was going to bring up the bigs in just a little bit, but I was going to say, the one big thing that you have between the 2 of them too is balance. Where you didn't really have a physical big. I don't know the last physical big they've really had outside of, if you want to say Manny was physical, I don't really think he was physical. He could block shots, but on the offensive end of the floor, he wasn't driving into guys and trying to get buckets. You've got a guy that's physical in Dusan Mahorchik, and then you've got another guy in DJ Burns that I'm not going to say a finesse player, but he's got really, really good post moves to be able to drive inside. And I think that is hugely beneficial for this team. All right. So before we get too far away from it, let's start going back to some individual performances as well here. Let's take a look at Jarkel Joyner. Obviously, one of the biggest standouts, I won't say one of, the biggest standout as far as a scoring perspective for NC State in those 3 games. He went from being, the second or third leading scorer for NC State to being the top scorer because of his performances down in the Bahamas. Miles, just your thoughts, because we've talked about Jarkel and the type of impact he can have for this team, but we've seen it on the offensive end, we've seen it on the defensive end, we've seen it from an overall speed element of this team, being able to move up and down the court even quicker than we did last year. Just your thoughts on his impact and what you saw on the battle for Atlantis.
He's been great. He's been better. I knew he'd be good. He's been better than I thought he'd be. I think the 3-point touch has been obviously improved. I think you look at the work that he and Casey Marcel put in the offseason on just getting their range more consistent has been a huge factor. But for Jarkel, you could tell that, he knows this is his last go at this thing and he wants to end it the right way. And I think he's taking the leadership role he has very seriously. I think you see him kind of taking Terquavion Smith under his wing in a way, which is kind of, Terquavion led the team in scoring, was probably ACC Freshman of the Year, and for, one of the best, one and dones to ever come through Duke, if not the best in Paulo, at least in my opinion. And we see what he's doing now in the NBA. But that's not typical. And I think for Terquavion to buy into that under Jarkel kind of speaks volumes on who Jarkel is as a person and player. So seeing what he's been able to do with his confidence, with his leadership, with his kind of willingness to take a game over for a stretch. He gets to his spots and is super comfortable. And it's been really, really refreshing to see because we haven't really seen NC State with a point guard like this in a while because Markell Johnson's senior year was so up and down that he really wasn't doing what Jarkel has done up to this point. And really I think it was his junior year where we last saw NC State point guard play like this and be that ringleader that they need. So it's been fun to watch. And I think it's only going to continue to get better as he continues to gel with his teammates and they buy into his leadership. And it's always good when your point guard is the bridge from the coaching staff to the roster. And that's kind of what it feels like here.
And Brian, the interesting element to me was we talked so much about him being a point guard, but kind of seemed like he took a little bit of a back seat, in terms of point guard position to Terquavion in this one. 0 assists in the first 2 games, had 3 in the final game against Butler. But just your thoughts on how much those two can switch off and on each other and how much that helps this backcourt too.
Yeah, the versatility's been awesome. And you guys were just both sort of touching on it. Like Jarkel's willing to get off the basketball and spot up and move without it or participate, be in the flow of NC State's half-court sets, which I think they've done a nice job getting into their stuff. But when they're just in their spread pick and roll or transition game, again, Jarkel can be a threat with and without the ball. He shot it well off the catch from deep. I think he has 6 assisted three-pointers of the 10 that he's made so far this season. And he's just scored efficiently from every single level of the floor. He's shooting 63% at the rim. He's shooting 44% in the paint away from the rim. He's shooting 57% on long mid-range twos. And obviously, he's close to 42%. And admittedly, these are smaller samples, of course, but he's just shot it well from every level. You can get him off the ball. He can play on the ball. He can run you a pick and roll. He can score in isolation. And he gives you the ability to go north-south in the half court with a screen or without a screen. Obviously, Turk can do that as well. But having 2 of those guys really can add some pop to your lineup. And I think it also, what that does is when he's able to get on the ball and kick out to Terquavion, then Smith can see closeouts, right? And then he can attack closeouts. He can shoot off the catch. He's not having to operate out of pick and roll and read coverages and read help line defenders. You can just simplify the math for him. And then Jarkel, just the mindset has been so good. You can see him. I think this team, I agree. I think he and Smith have a cool relationship as, younger guard, older guard. I think it's going to be really good long-term for Terquavion's development, long beyond his time here playing in Raleigh with NC State. And I just think Jarkel, he's not like a lockdown defender either, but he is pretty frisky at the point of attack. And you put he and Morcell at the point of attack, and all of a sudden, State's got 2 guys that can really guard the ball and heat things up. So I think Joyner has been a almost perfect fit into this roster. He's given them exactly what they've needed. And having he and Terquavion, who are willing to play off of one another, but can both play on the basketball and both take a game over with their own dribble, is it's a heck of a combination to have. And yeah, it's been a couple of years since State has had 2 guys like that, or multiple guys like that could really just completely take a game over from every level of the court in the half court.
Corey, do you remember when we had Jarkel on the Spaces over the summer?
Yeah. He
him
and Breon, yeah.
Him and Breon. I think I haven't talked to Jarkel much. I don't really know him like that, really, other than the Spaces. But you could tell he's a very positive, charismatic guy, and that is contagious, especially when it's an older guy in the locker room. And obviously, there are a lot of people, and analytics are very, very important, and they play a huge part. But the dynamic of a team is very, very, very important, and how the personalities collide with one another for better or for worse. And I think that is a huge dividend of the addition of Joyner, is just the positivity, the fact that he's willing to be a leader, say things that may or may not be comfortable at the time, but will bode well in the long run. I think that's another thing that's helping this team early.
Yeah. One thing I was going to say too is not everybody's directly said it. I think Casey Morcell is probably the one that came the closest to saying it, was that the chemistry was just bad last year.
Oh yeah, you could tell.
Kind of gave up on each other. They were frustrated with each other. And he's talked a lot about how much different the chemistry and how much different the vibe is really in the locker room for this team, and how much more belief they have in each other. And I think that's, a lot of that probably comes from Jarkel. I mean, we've seen it all offseason. I don't know if anybody follows him on Instagram or not, but you constantly saw his posts each and every single day of, deposits. And it was he would tag somebody else in it, whether it was DJ Burns, or the next day he would post, Casey Morcell, or the next day he'd post Terquavion. there's somebody going in there and putting in work with him. And it eventually turned into multiple guys. It turned into, 2-on-2, 3-on-3 sessions going into the Weisiger Brown building. And that I think is massive for this team and being able to develop that chemistry together.
That's huge, man. I actually didn't even know about that. That's stuff like that. If you like and play, know basketball, that matters. You know what I mean? Like that is culture's important. And that is the kind of stuff that helps build foster relationships and build culture. It's invaluable. Yeah.
And we talked a little about Terquavion earlier. I wanted to touch on his performances. The shooting number is not great for him. We touched on the injury earlier. The Achilles is kind of sounds like something that he's been dealing with, but then also at the same time, the ankle that he hurt in the Butler game, didn't shoot above 34% in any of these games, but at the same time led NC State in every single game in terms of assists. Did have the 8 turnovers against Kansas. I mean, are these things concerns for you guys? The not great shooting clips, the turnovers against Kansas. I mean, Miles, I saw you shake your head. I mean, just your thoughts on why this isn't something that you should really be concerned about this early in the season.
I've watched Terquavion very closely for years and years and years.
Yeah.
One, this kid is unfazed. He could be 0 for 10, and there's a dagger to be taken. He's going to take it. And, some people may say we don't want that. Me personally, and I know that staff personally, like we want the good and bad with Terquavion Smith. And I think if you look at the fact that despite the shooting struggles, and he did turn it over a lot against Kansas, and a lot of that was his fault. Just in Kansas did a good job kind of mixing up looks and making it difficult with those cross-court passes. I think he had 2 or 3 of those turnovers on that. But
he also had 6 assists in that game too. So
exactly. So and he was kind of put in a situation where he had to get rid of the ball a lot. And Kansas, they're a top 10 team in the country, and they're good. So, but regardless, I've seen Terquavion go through slumps. I've seen Terquavion have bad games. I think the one example, and you made the joke about, Bobby, Breon, and T are all on the floor at the same time. And I made the joke about, they in Rock Hill in t-shirts. They were playing. This is just a crazy throwback story. They were playing against Team Charlotte. I think Terquavion finished 1 for 13. Him and Bobby were like screaming at each other after the game. And then the next day, first 3 plays, dribble handoff Bobby to T for 3. All 3 went in. And I think he had like 36.
Yeah.
He is going to go through ups and downs. It's the nature of his game. He's a high volume, tough shot maker. That is what those guys do. But you have to live with the good and the bad. And he didn't shoot it well, but he played well. He didn't necessarily force the issue too much. He found a way to rebound. He found a way to be a pesky defender. He found a way to get other guys quality looks. So just get ready for whenever the next game is. I think it's Tuesday night. Don't be surprised if he goes 6 of 8 from 3.
Yeah.
Or whatever it may be.
And, he also has some time to rest, which is significant.
Yeah, exactly. So, and for jump shooters, 3 games in 3 days, and T plays heavy minutes. I think in the Campbell game or Elon game, he played 40 minutes, which I'm sure Kevin Keats would rather have to not do, but he felt like he had to in that situation. So, no, long story short, I'm not remotely concerned, and he's going to be just fine.
One thing I wanted to point out really quickly, Brian, I'm going to get to you in just a second, but I wanted to say that was actually the Dayton game that he had 6 assists and 8 turnovers, not the Kansas game. He did have 4 turnovers in the Kansas game, but that was just the Dayton game. Again, like you said, it just felt like he's trying to do a lot more cross-court passes, do a lot more than he really probably needed to in that game. And I think that's something that I'll get to in a second, but I think that's something that he's trying to work through. And Kevin Keats is trying to give him the opportunity to work through as well at the point guard position.
Yeah, I think just to bounce off that, I think these are great reps for him. Like, obviously, like to see what he can do this season at NC State or beyond, but just like the long-term bet on Terquavion is the creation upside he has. Like that's what teams in the NBA are thinking about and chewing on. And so it's great that he's getting those reps. It's just huge for him and his development, in my opinion. And like, it would be concerning if Terquavion wasn't taking these shots. It's like you have one of the weirdest, most skilled shot makers in the history of the program, and like, I'm sure sometimes he takes some shots, and I'm certain some people have got to be thinking, whoa, like what's he doing there? But you ultimately, like, that's just a part of the package. And then you see the moments of brilliance with him on the basketball or shooting off the catch from deep. And it just, everything clicks into place. I think one of the key things for him is going to be, especially as he continues to get those on-ball reps, running pick and roll, being the primary initiator, is like you see it click with him sometimes, and other times he maybe forces it a little bit as a passer. But just like the coaching staff, I think they got to keep reminding him, like, dude, once you draw two guys to the ball, you've done your job. Like that's it. Like if you pass it to someone, it's a 4-on-3. And like you're such a sick shooter, like you run, like go relocate, and the next pass might be back to you. And I just think that stuff is that, again, I think for the most part he's been pretty good at that. I think there are other times where he does try to kind of hit the home run on some of those passes and will force it into tight windows, or he had a couple skip passes against Kansas that he just didn't see DeJuan Harris on the weak side, and those passes got intercepted, which is like, once that guy takes two players out of the possession, which is one with just himself, he's done his job. Like that's it. He created the advantage for them in the half court. So I think it's important to keep hammering that home with him. And and that's the kind of thing that'll just tighten his game up along the margins and, make him, cut down some of the turnovers. And then again, some of those turnovers are going to turn into free throws. They'll turn into catch and shoot threes when he gets off the basketball, which is big. So, anyways, I think for the most part, Turk has been incredibly enjoyable and fun to watch this season. His ability to get downhill, I don't think Turk has like an amazing first step. I would say it's like pretty good. But what he does with his second and third step, or his second and third dribble, is just like, it's wild stuff. Like he is such a creative and intuitive offensive player. I don't know, man. I have an absolute blast watching him play. And I do think some of the strides he's made as a playmaker, they haven't been perfect, but if you're watching the games, I think that there's been a lot of good too, and you're just kind of hoping to see it progress over the next few months as well.
Yeah, and kind of back to what I was saying beforehand, I think that a big element of this all too is the fact that he is, working on developing, a point guard skill set at times, because that's what the NBA said. Miles, we've gone back and forth on this, like, he's not a point guard, but the NBA kind of wants him to be a little bit of a point guard, at least be able to move the ball and be able to play on and off the ball like he is with NC State this year. And I think he's still working through some of that. That's why I'm not concerned this early on about it. Now, if it gets an ACC play and you're playing against, UNC or Duke, and you have 8 turnovers and you only hit 4 out of your 15 shots, that may be a little bit of a, bigger reason for concern. But I think this early on, when you're still developing and you're still looking at what you have at the point guard position and seeing how those two are going to flow with each other, I'm not concerned with where he's at right now. And again, like you said, he's such a volume shooter and a guy that is going to hit shots eventually, that once he gets back into the flow, I don't think there's any reason to be concerned, especially, once you have some teams that they can work through against over these next 2 weeks. You have Pittsburgh sandwich in between. I want to say, I can't remember who it is on Tuesday, but the following week it's like Coppin State. So you've got some games where you can really work through those issues as well for him. And again, we've talked about this a few times, Miles, but Terquavion is a guy too that feeds off the energy of the crowd. I mean, we're talking about going to the Bahamas, where there's probably a total of like 100 NC State fans, maybe a little bit more than that, but not much more, going down for Thanksgiving to the Bahamas just to watch your basketball team play. I think once you get now, if PNC is a little more lively than it was last year, that might really help him, and it might help the rest of the team too, because I mean, and we haven't even touched on this, but like, this team deserves, and I'll take a quick break from, talking about individual performances, but like, this team deserves to have a much better crowd than what the showing was last year, because I think some people are kind of giving up on that year's team, and rightfully so. But don't think that last year's team is this year's team, and you shouldn't show up for them at PNC, right?
Yeah. That's like a huge thing to touch on too, because we've seen PNC rock.
Yeah, I mean, they've been
really rock.
These games have been won. Yeah,
and I remember, this was before I started working with Pack Pride. Like, I remember going when they played Auburn and sitting in the upper deck, and I was like, bro, this place is rocking.
Yeah,
rocking, and it was crazy. So I think that with this team's early start, with the fact that you still have the familiar faces of guys like T back in the fold, and then you have all the new pieces. I think that this is a team that, this fan base should be able to galvanize around, and they might, be a little cautionary at first just with how the last couple of years have gone, and that's understandable. But if they continue to string together wins, they run through the non-conference and handle Pittsburgh, I got to imagine that first big game at home, there's going to be a lot of people there. And if they're sitting at 10-1 or whatever it is, in, about a month from now, that's going to be a really, really good thing for this program to kind of get the community galvanized around them again, which, like you said, at this point, they deserve it. They really do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the schedule here. It is William & Mary this Tuesday, and then Pitt at home, and then Coppin State, which I think the Furman game, I believe, is the one that's going to be over at Reynolds, which will always be a big game. But the
Furman's actually pretty good, so that'll be a good game.
I was going to say, I think the first big home game for State in PNC Arena. I mean, if you want to say Pitt, sure, but I mean, it is an ACC game. They should be able to have a big crowd for that one.
I'll say this: if Furman is playing Pitt in a neutral site, Furman's favored by 6 points.
Yeah, well, the Furman's going to have the best player on the court in that game, in Jalen Slauson. Like Furman may have an NBA player on their roster. Like I don't know if you guys have seen Slauson. He play like he's just like a kind of like undersized 5, but he kind of like does everything. Like he can.
And they have Carter Witt as their 6th man.
Yeah, they got a little ACC coming off the bench.
There you go.
But Slauson is legit. Like he's one of the better, I think, returning players in the country. Just happens to be on Furman. But yeah, I would just say like there was so much bad around the program the last year and change, and like it really does look like out of all of that emerged to be a not just like a competent and solid team, but like one that's fun. like Jarkel Jordan and Jaquavion Smith, it's fun to watch those guys play basketball. So I think the entertainment value, as long as they keep stacking days and stacking wins, should be pretty high, and it's worth paying a little bit of money to see this team in action if you can.
Yeah, I was going to say the first really big home game is going to be December 22nd against Louisville. The Vanderbilt game being a neutral site game. And then, like I said, Furman right before that, which will be a good game, of course. But I think that first big game is going to be Louisville at home. And I think that one, outside of, like I said, again, Pitt is going to be, 7 p.m. this coming up Friday. Should be a big game for fans to show up at. But, I mean, I'm looking at the rest of the ACC, too, and there's a lot of winnable games in there. I mean, Boston College is 5-2 right now, but Boston College is, we know, not nearly as talented as a lot of teams in the ACC. I'm looking at, a Clemson team that's 5-2 right now. And then you've got, Pittsburgh right now is 4-3 after winning 3 straight against some really bad teams. And then Syracuse 3-3 right now. Florida State is 1-6. Louisville.
You want me to say it, Corey?
Yeah.
The ACC stinks.
Yes. Yes.
The ACC stinks.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Florida State's
Virginia's really good again.
Virginia's way better than I thought they'd be. So credit.
The top half of the ACC is pretty good, but there's like 5 or 6 teams in the top half.
It's like the top third, maybe. Like
yeah.
Notre Dame is iffy. Clemson's iffy. I'd say Georgia Tech is bad. I'd say Louisville is obviously bad. Florida State's going to be interesting because Bob Miller's a player, and getting him back is he's going to help them win games. But man, this league is bad. Wake Forest is not very good. Carolina's not as good as everyone thought they'd be. They're in a dogfight with Alabama right now in overtime. And Alabama's really good, so that's nothing to slouch about. Duke isn't as good as everybody thought. Lively and Whitehead are going to take a minute to get there. Mm-hmm. This state team, like preseason 10th, it's kind of looking silly now. Like they should, after what we've gone through in the first 6 games, like they should be like, hey, we could be a top 5 team in this league.
Yeah. I don't know how much you guys have seen of Florida State this season. I've watched a couple of their games, and it's just like they're like, I like Caleb Mills I think he's like a really solid college guard, and I think
I was in the Mills Mafia. I watched Caleb Mills go for 40 and not break a sweat in an AAU game, but leaving Houston, it just
I think he's a little miscast. Like they're really needing him to like be the primary initiator, and I think he's like better. Like he needs a Jarkel Joyner next to him. You know what I mean, to help organize things. And I think the hope was that Jalen Morley would sort of like the runway is there for him, and he's a really talented 2nd-year guard, but just like he's not there. And then like they're getting absolutely pummeled on the defensive glass, and they switch a ton. You know what I mean? Which is going to leave them open to being crushed on the glass, but like that's been a huge issue. And I'll just say, like, the thing that is striking for me watching FSU that makes their defense look different than it did, say, in 2019, 2020 with Devin Vassell and Trent Forrest and Patrick Williams, like obviously the high-end talent. But those teams that switched just as much were incredible at rotating behind the play. Like if you tried to switch and then throw it into the post, like they had someone flying on the backside to intercept that or deflect the pass. They just took away. I mean, you could get them offline, but their denials were so good and the rotations and the communication was so good. And I don't see it with this team, at least not yet. They've got like switchy personnel, but just like it's not hitting. Every time I watch them play, I think UCF in Florida, they just like the rotations in the defense just is not the same, I think, sort of like caliber as it was of like a couple of years ago when FSU was like one of the best teams in the country for a window of time.
Yeah, they've also always had tremendous size at every position, and they've got that still, but it's just like, again, like you said, it's just not a lot of confidence that every single person can switch and fill in those spots. And I think, again, that's where an NC State team that does switch 1 through 4 on a consistent basis can thrive in those situations. And let's go back to – I wanted to go back to the bigs as well because we've talked a little bit about it already, what they can add to this team and what they have added already. But Brian, I mean, what does the addition of Mahorchik and Burns look like so far? Because I'm looking back at the 3 games that they played in the Battle for Atlantis. You know, Burns was consistent throughout. I think he had 8 points in the first game, and I think he had 32 points in 47 minutes played. Obviously, he can't play a ton of minutes because of conditioning, but what he is giving you when he comes off the bench has been tremendous so far. And then Mahorchik, over the last 2 games, had 11 points per game. And then against Kansas, while his shot wasn't there, I think he only finished with like 4 points. He still had 9 rebounds in that game and added a lot of value there as well. So what are your thoughts on where the bigs are right now?
Yeah, I think like check. I think both like double check marks with both those guys. I think they fit really well into their roles. And I mean, just circles back to like State did a really nice job in the transfer portal. Joyner, Clark, Burns, Mahorchik. Like that's really, really good work. They just got a bunch of quality starter level, ACC players. That's not easy to do. So shout out to the staff for doing that. I'm sure you guys both spent time around DJ Burns or watched him at Winthrop. I covered him in the Big South Conference, and like you knew what you were going to get with Burns, which was like what he could do offensively inside of 18 feet. The passing, the post play, the conditioning, some of the foul issues, they are what they are, but State's not asking him to play 30 minutes a game. That was never going to be the ask. The ask is to play, give us 15 to 20 minutes a game. We're going to run some offense through you. I think it's huge for Burns. I think a lot of times his success, like when they throw it into him, depends on where the initial catch is. So like sometimes like the Burns post-ups that I think don't go anywhere and end up with him throwing a bad pass for a turnover or taking a tough fadeaway shot, or when that catch comes just like further up the lane or off the lane. When he gets good post position, man, it's tough because he's got footwork, he's got touch around the basket, and you send a double team, and if he catches it deeper, that double team has to cover more ground. Then he can pick out cutters. We've seen him do it. Like you can run offense through him. And that was one of the things that I thought would be nice is that it just wasn't going to have to be Jarkel pick and roll, Terquavion pick and roll. Like you could bring this guy off the bench and throw it to him. And they do. Like, and it's not just like LA once a game, twice a game. Like they give him a half dozen or so possessions every game where they spread things out. They just dump it to him in the post, or they run a little cross screen to get him deeper post position. Or they run this little high-low after timeout play where he sets up in the middle of the lane and Terquavion or whomever else or Casey Morcell throw it into him and he goes to work from there. And defensively, like, it is what it is. Ultimately, you're just asking him to be – like he is a huge human being. So you're just asking him to just like move his feet and be in the way. Like being 6'9", however many pounds he weighs, and just like as long as you're in the way, that's hard to score on, Yeah. And so I think for the most part, the pick and roll defense, like it hadn't been great, but I don't think it's been like a dumpster fire. And I think the times when it really does not look great or when opponents are like intentional about emptying out the corner and then running empty corner pick and roll against DJ Burns. If you do that in the middle and there's help flying around, like he can move his feet and stay in front of the ball. You're just asking him for effort. And so far, I think that they can mostly stay afloat. The numbers with him on the court, I won't read them off right this second, but they're very positive. Like the 4 starting guards and wings plus DJ Burns, so him in for Mahorcic, has been an awesome lineup for State this season in terms of scoring margin. And then, with Mahorcic, like I just think he's an awesome, like kind of like old school big guy. Yeah. You just like he's in there to just like mash dudes with screens.
Luke Longley.
You just pound the glass, and he catches everything. He catches a lot. Most of the stuff you throw at him, which is nice. So like again, he makes a nice partner in the pick and roll. But you can throw it to him on the block. He can give you some post ups. And then defensively, I think he's given State just enough scheme versatility because like he's not made out of granite. Like that dude can slide in space. He can move in space. So for the most part, I mean, they use him to switch out sometimes, late in the clock, or if it's a screen with Jack Clark's guy, they'll let him switch. They trust him to do that. But for the most part, they're bringing him up to the level, and he's got the foot speed and obviously the size to kind of like be in 2 places at one time. When the ball's on the side, they're going to try to ice and down those screens, and he can do that as well. So just like there's not just one way to like beat NC State's pick and roll defense when he's guarding the screener. And I think that is like an underrated, huge component for them. And I think it makes me think that was like the biggest like value add was just like his ability to be athletic and active and aggressive and versatile as a screen and roll defender. And I'll tie it up here. Just like the rebounding numbers have been awesome, just awesome. 14% offensive rebound rate, 23.5% defensive rebound rate. These are monster numbers. And he's one of the reasons why State is like winning that part of the 4 factors in terms of rebound rate.
Yeah, and that was a big struggle for State last year too. I mean, was it was constantly talked about. We're going to have to be a team, a rebounding team, as opposed to being able to get it from the bigs. Because Jalen Gibson, I mean, Miles, I'll give you a stat here before I toss it to you. But I mean, these are simple stats here. But if we're looking at the primary bigs last year versus the primary bigs this year, okay. Jalen Gibson and E.B. Dewanda, obviously E.B. still on the team this year, but the 2 of them combined on the year for 7.7 points and then 4.4 rebounds. Okay, those are your 2 combined guys. So far, Mahorcic and DJ Burns, 16.7 points and 10.6 rebounds. I mean, that's more than doubling both of those numbers so far from the 2 of them. And that's not even putting in, Ernest Ross and some other guys that are playing those positions. Obviously, Greg Gant really hasn't got much of a run so far. But also, Jack Clark, the addition that he has kind of filling in that Sebron role as a rebounder too. And we'll talk about Jack Clark in just a second. But Miles, your thoughts on the bigs so far this season and what they've added?
You said they're averaging 16 and 10 combined?
Yeah, 16.7 points combined and 10.6 rebounds. Yeah.
Which is like so far from like dominant, but like so important. Yeah. So that's key.
Especially when you have the guard play that NC State has.
Yeah, exactly. They don't need them to necessarily have massive games offensively and obviously DJ is very productive and Mahorcic just kind of cleans things up. I think I mentioned it earlier, like when you have 2 bruisers, and like they're both big dudes, and obviously DJ's more of I'm gonna like back you down and kind of take your will away, and Mahorcic is really just a rugged, hard nosed, like I'm gonna put my elbow into your chest, I'm gonna block you out, I'm gonna let you know that I blocked you out, and I'm gonna get this rebound and probably finish a layup over you. So when you have the 2 guys that just physically and mentally wear down the opponents, like we've seen Manny Bates be as dominant as any big on the defensive end of the floor as in the country, as anybody when he's healthy. And those 2 guys were able to get into his body and limit him on that end and really take his will away at the end of that game. So I think that's important. And then neither one are traditional rim protectors. Neither one will probably average more than a block and a half a game, even if maybe a block. But they do a good job walling up. They don't let you get clean finishes for the most part. And they've done, like Brian said, a good enough job in ball screen situations defensively up to this point. Now, I think that is going to be an issue down the line when they play some teams with better, guard big duos and pick and roll. And then that's where you can bring in, you have the luxury of a guy like Ibi Dewana, who you can bring in for stretches as more of a true anchor rim protector type. If you need to throw Ibi in the minutes, he can do that, which is nice. And Greg obviously provides the switchability that those guys don't have. So we'll see if we see Kevin try to develop that depth a little bit in some of these easier games over the next little bit before conference play. And whether he decides to do that or not, I don't know, but it probably wouldn't be a bad idea. But the way that those two are playing right now has been really, really impressive to see. And it's making life for the guards a hell of a lot easier.
It really helps too that they get some secondary rim protection. It's like they don't have traditional guys, and this is not going to be an elite or it doesn't have to be an elite shot blocking team, in part because, again, they're rebounding the hell out of the basketball and they do force turnovers. But having Jack Clark be a guy that can block some shots and having Ernest Ross be a guy that can come in and really, he had a really nice chase down block in the Butler game. But getting a little bit of a secondary rim protection from those guys, I think, goes a long way. Heck, they've even gotten some secondary rim protection from Jaquavion Smith this season, using his quick hands and his long arms. The other thing I would say, too, is what DJ Burns did against Holmes of Dayton. I mean, I said it at the top, but Daron Holmes is like one of the best players in the country, one of the best interior players in the country, and is an excellent defender. What Burns did in that, what he did, using his size and his strength advantage and his weight advantage, it was that if he could bottle that up and do that every game or every other game, I mean, he's already a very productive player. But man, it was just as good as I think I've seen probably close to 10 Daron Holmes games, and that's as sort of physically overwhelmed as I've seen him look going up against someone that was just willing to just be powerful against him in the post. Really impressive stuff. And Miles brings up a great point. About maybe experimenting with some of these different center lineups. I think it would be interesting to see them. Ross really does seem to be glued to the backup 4 role right now. Even at times, you've seen him and Jack Clark play together. When that happens, Clark, shifts over to the de facto 3. But I think it would be interesting to get Ross out there and just see, do you have a 5-man lineup where you can switch 1 through 5? You can kind of
go 5 out offensively too.
You can kind of do that with Mahorcic on situationally, but that's what they did with Ross last year. He played almost exclusively at the 5. I mean, it was out of necessity. And this is not going to, against UNC, you're not going to have him, try to muscle up with Armando Bacot or whatever. But I just think there's certain teams, ones that aren't willing to really dump into the post or whatever, where you could say we're going to add a little bit of length. We're going to add a little bit of shot blocking out there. And we're just going to say everyone switch, just keep the ball in front. Because I think when Ross sometimes does get himself in trouble, it's where to be rotating off the basketball, where to be when he's guarding off the ball. But if it's just hey, everyone switch, keep the ball in front, maybe that's something he can do a little bit better. And all of a sudden you've got another lineup that you can just throw at teams if you're wanting to switch and maybe throw something at a team that has really good guards and pull up shooting or whatever. And so maybe Ross offers you another sort of option there. Not one you're going to go to a lot, but just one a little bit more versatile lineup and scheme versatility with Ross.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, those are really important right now for, while you're in these games, you're not playing against ACC level competition, for those guys to get reps at those spots too. And that once you get an ACC play, again, like you said, you're not going to do it against UNC. You're probably not going to do it against Duke. I mean, I'm trying to think, you're probably not going to do it against Virginia as well. But when you're playing in those spots, you want to be able to have guys that have some comfortability playing at those spots as well. So, last guy I want to touch on here before we really touch on the overall result of what you get from the battle for Atlantis. But Jack Clark, I mean, the numbers don't stick out. I mean, I had heard, in some of the scrimmages, he had gone off for, 6 or 7 threes in a single game and, had 25 points. And then, we heard about it in the first trip to the Bahamas. He had, I think, 2 double-doubles in that one. And some of it was because Jaquavion had to come off the court for cramping in one of the games. And, you haven't really seen that side of things step up for him yet so far. But, man, I mean, he is just like I said earlier, I mean, he's really kind of filled in that, I don't really know how to say it exactly here, but like the consistency element that you had from Darion Sebron. He's not a driver like Darion Sebron is. He's not a guy that's going to, get the ball up and down the court for you, but he's adding some really good points for you. He's adding some, getting a ton of rebounds to be able to create for other guys. And it just, Brian, you kind of wrote about this earlier in the year, but how much his versatility is helping this team. What were your thoughts on his performances from the Battle for Atlantis too?
Yeah, I mean, dude is just super steady and is playing his role so well. And when those shots start to fall, because he's getting good looks, like these aren't forced looks. Like these looks are coming off the catch. They're coming within the flow of State's offense. And I know going back to his time at LaSalle, Clark was never like a knockdown shooter. But I think if he gets this up from 28% to 35%, that just raises the floor of the offense overall because the looks are there. Like Jarkel and Darquavion are going to create in State's pick and roll sets. They're going to create these looks. They're there. And if he just starts to make a few more of those, what's already, I think, is a solid season is going to jump a little bit. I love his movement without the basketball offensively. I think he's maybe State's best cutter, timely, situational. Maybe Morcell gives you some of that too. But I just think Clark, his timing and his aggression as a cutter, you don't see it a ton, but it pops up every now and then, and I think it's pretty good. I think his team defense has been solid. Like he gets pick six, maybe not picks. Well, he had a pick six once, one against Butler, but he's in the passing lanes. He has kind of like a free safety ability to State's defense. He can switch. He guards a ton of positions. 7 dunks on the season. That's not nothing. Like, in fact, I think that speaks to the transition game. That speaks to the cutting and that Clark is providing this team with. And I just look, when Jericho Helms left, they needed someone to come in and be to stabilize the small ball 4 position or the hybrid 4 position, whatever you want to call it. It used to be Dorn, then it became Helms. And ultimately, and now it's Jack Clark. I think ultimately you do want him to shoot better on those threes, but you want him to keep shooting because you want teams to guard those actions. So I want to see the volume stay where it is. So I think Clark has been solid. I think he's given State just enough shooting and just enough movement for the half-court offense. He's an important piece in a lot of their sets with his ability to space, to relocate, and to screen on empty side actions. And defensively, for him to switch 1 through 4, to be a good helper. And he's really done a nice job on the defensive glass this season too. So I think Clark has been just, maybe not a perfect fit, but pretty darn close to it. He's been a really nice plug and play guy in the forward room for Kevin Keatts.
I was going to say he's been a lot closer to Torin Dorn, CJ Bryce type of 3-man than what you had, and trying to fill. 2 years ago, trying to put Devin Daniels in that spot, and that didn't really work out. And then last year, trying to put Jericho Helms in that spot, and it worked, but he wasn't you bring up the cutting ability, that was never going to be Jericho Helms. He was never going to be a guy that can really, get you an easy mid-range jumper on a consistent basis, and you get that with Jack Clark. And I think that's where you're kind of getting back to that style of play that you saw with the Torin Dorn, CJ Bryce, and some unselfish play too, right, Miles?
Yeah, and I think another thing that's going to come into play throughout this, the season is, especially obviously when you play Syracuse, but he's a perfect middle of the zone guy.
Because he can nail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can put him at that elbow free throw line area and just let him either raise up and hit a shot. He can drive at the big. He can also make the play for somebody else if the defense collapses in. So I think that's a good spot to have him at too. That's something that's going to come into play. But I like Brian said, he is a perfect combination at that 4 kind of hybrid 4 spot of size and fluidity. Helms had the size, not quite as fluid. Daniels had the fluidity, not quite the size. That's why you saw guys like Torin and CJ have that success because of their ability to create, which we haven't seen Clark do a ton of yet, but we know that he's capable of in spots, especially within 2 to 3 dribbles. The other thing is, I'm glad you brought up the cutting, and even defensively, he's a really good instinctual basketball player. He's kind of knows what to do and when to do it. And that is not something that every player is gifted with, and you kind of just have it or you don't. He happens to have it, and he's done a good job making momentum shifting plays defensively that lead to, above the rim finishes and transition baskets and stuff like that, shift your momentum. So I think Clark is a seamless fit, and I do think his production is going to go up, and I do think the shots are going to fall at a more consistent rate. You'll probably see his percentage go up 5 to 10, and Marcel's fall probably 8 to 12 or so throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, the only time State has, just real quickly, the only time State has seen zone this season was the Elon game, I think, as far as like my charting goes. And that was there were some Burns at the nail, there was some Mahorcic at the nail, but it was primarily Clark, and they got really good stuff off of that. Clark hit 2 jumpers. He kicked out to Marcel for a 3 in the corner. So yeah, he is the guy for them to sort of like throw into the middle of the zone and let him like detonate from there. He's got the size, the shooting, the passing, and sort of like the feel to really do some damage in there. So anyways, just wanted to circle back to that. They haven't seen a lot of zone this season, but when they have, Clark has been the primary guy for them to play at the nail.
Yeah, and I was going to say, we talked about the CJ Bryce and the Torin Doran kind of fit. The one difference here, obviously, being the fact that Jack Clark is also 6'8", compared to the two of them being 6'5". So that gives you more of a. They were both very good rebounders in that role, and so was Jericho Helms at times last year. But you've seen it from him. It's just more natural for him to get up there and get a rebound. That's the one thing that he's added since he's added size. I mean, he was as a junior. As a senior coming out of high school, he was like 6'2", 6'3". He's now grown into a 6'8" body, and he's like, I can rebound the basketball. I'm going to do that with regularity, and it's worked out really well for him. I also wanted to point out, too, I mean, he had 10 points, 8.5 rebounds in the last 2 games. He also had 5 steals, and like you guys said, I mean, instinctually did the right things with every single one of those. It led to points, I believe, on 4 of those steals in those 3 games. So those are, again, big elements of his game that he can add for NC State. And something, again, they've struggled against the zone in the Kevin Keatts era for the most part. You get somebody like that at the nail, that's a really big addition for them. All right, now let's just go with the overarching theme here. Just you guys' thoughts, because I know obviously you don't get the win against Kansas, but it's a really good showing for NC State. That's not going to help at the end of the year resume-wise, but you didn't lose by 20 or lose by 30 and then suddenly win the next 2 games. But NC State does win 2 really good games. I think teams that will be pushing for the NCAA tournament, if they win either their conferences or or at the very least, if there's 2 bids, 3 bids out of their conferences, they have a chance to make it to the NCAA tournament. You guys' thoughts on how much this helps NC State in terms of your overall confidence in them as a team, but also the resume before they get into ACC play? Miles, I'll let you start that one off, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, I coming into the year, I knew the State team would be a lot better than last year, but it was kind of like, okay, how do the pieces fit? It was very much a wait and see type deal. Like, all right, we have these constants, but are they going to be able to guard ball screens? Are they going to be able to rebound the way they need to be able to? Is Joyner going to be able to hit threes? And the one I didn't see coming is Casey Marcel becoming Klay Thompson, but I don't think anybody saw that.
Yeah,
but that's probably not sustainable. But he still clearly improved his shooting.
Somebody brought this up, and I want to say major CJ Williams vibes because CJ Williams that first year under Keatts, or actually it was the first year under Godfrey. Like that was so long ago. But that first year under Godfrey, it was like, is CJ Williams a lost cause? And all of a sudden he just comes out and he was like the glue guy to that team and hit a lot of corner threes that were big. I mean, I'm seeing that with Casey Marcel, obviously just his second year with NC State. But again, sorry, back to you, Miles. Apologies.
Oh, no, you're good. It's just a really encouraging start. And it's kind of like, all right, they have the formula. They have to find a way to sustain it. That remains to be seen. But like I said earlier, there's no reason to believe why they can't. Everything they're doing is translatable. They have a bevy of different pieces. I think the fact that LJ Thomas and Breon Pass are both comfortable on the floor is a really, really good sign early. That should only continue to happen as they get more and more experience. And they both are capable of playing on or off the ball as well. So you have all these guards that you can rotate in. You have guys that are capable of alleviating your star players and give them rest to make sure their legs are fresh when it comes down to crunch time. And it's a balanced team, and it's really, really good to see. And I think, like Corey said earlier, this is a team that this campus and community should want to galvanize themselves around and pack PNC when a big team comes to town, or even just even if Coppin State comes to town, they should be able to have a lot of fans in there. So I think that's the biggest thing. And it's just a really, really encouraging start. Grady Dick went berserk in the first half of that game. He shot the cover out of the ball. And
again, there was a lot of contested threes that he made too.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
he's crazy.
He's 6'8" with a high release, in great touch. Like it's hard. It's hard to stop that, you know?
Yeah, for sure. You just kind of have to hope he misses. So, and like they were able to do a good job. And part of like another encouraging thing is like they held him in check in the second half. Like they made adjustments and it worked. Like that's very encouraging. So I think a lot of things to be happy about coming back, and just hope they can kind of continue to keep it rolling.
Yeah, I think, and maybe we should have even talked about Morcell at some point of this pod because he's just played so well. But like, I watched every game Casey played at UVA this first 2 seasons, and his growth as a player is incredible. Like, he's ditched so many bad habits that he had offensively. Like, he was so in love with taking off dribble pull up twos, and he was really like an odd fit in like the blocker mover offense for Tony Bennett. And I was worried coming to state that we were just going to get a lot of like pull up twos from KC coming off the pick and roll. Like, we just see so much of that, but man, he's just played such like he basically takes no long twos now, or very few. Like he is like spot up threes, or he's at the rim off a cut or a transition or a catch and go drive in the half court. And just like the guy is like, you can tell things have slowed down for him. He has simplified his game, and he's playing just awesome two-way basketball. Just really
he's also healthy, which is significant.
Huge. Yeah, it's a great point. Great point. And like, yes, having him healthy, having him play like this, because last season when things really obviously a lot contributed last season falling apart, but his injury earlier in the season like kind of derailed things. And having him back healthy, playing this kind of basketball, giving you that point of attack defense is huge for this team. And just where I'm at with this team in general is just like, it's hard not to be positive. I mean, you don't want to like get ahead of yourself here. And you also really wish they, were playing in the Big Ten Challenge just so there could be one more measuring stick game to see State play in or whatever. But still some good games. The next 3 weeks, Miami, Furman, Vanderbilt. We talked about some of those coming up. That'll be really nice to see how they handle it there. I'll be curious to see if the defensive rebounding continues. If that sticks, I feel really good about this team throughout the season. If that defensive rebound rate stays high, they're doing a nice job keeping down 3-point attempt rate. Teams aren't taking a ton of threes against them, which has been it's one of the reasons why you switch. You take away some of those threes. That's been a trend underneath Kevin Keatts. Opponents are shooting under 34% on threes against them, though. So maybe they're getting a little bit of maybe teams shoot a little bit better, especially as the competition stacks up. But as long as you keep that rate low in terms of attempt rate and you continue to rebound the ball and just work hard guarding pick and roll, I think offensively this team's going to be good. And so it's just where is this defense? Is it a top 75 defense or is it a top 125 defense? And I think ultimately, depending on where they land there, that is going to determine just how good this team can be. But right now, I don't want to throw too much shade at them because they're playing really, really, really nice basketball. And I think they have, mostly because of Turk, he has the ability to play better. They can take it up a notch too from here. So I cannot wait to see where things go.
Yeah. And the biggest thing to me that I take away from those last 2 games, particularly, the Dayton and Butler wins, is the fact that this team was able to rebound from, taking a tough loss against Kansas. Obviously, nobody expected NC State to beat Kansas, but they went in there expecting to be able to win that game, put them, all the way down to the wire against Kansas. And then everybody's kind of going, I remember this story. I saw this last year. NC State did the exact same thing as #1 Purdue, neutral site game, and then went into a neutral site situation the following week and lost to Richmond, and then lost to Wright State, and then went to Miami and lost, and then played against Florida State and lost. And that
Wright State game was such a dagger.
Yeah, and that's the thing. All those elements just played into that, and it was oh man, this team is suddenly 7-7 or really bad. They were able to rebound and win those last 2 games, and I think that was really significant for them.
I will say it's look, State should have beaten Wright State, and I'm not trying to reverse engineer feeling less bad about that game or whatever, but Wright State was good, man. They played well against Arizona in the NCAA tournament. Like Grant Basili's like in the rotation is one of the best players at Virginia Tech, the center that can shoot, who transferred in there. But it's like, I get like certainly like it was worth being upset.
I'm pretty sure they got their ass beat at home by Wright State. It's like all right.
Yeah, 80-70. Yeah.
It does turn out it's like this team Wright State, like look, State should win that game 10 out of 10 times, but that team was also like not as bad as maybe your sort of like average mid-major team, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
For sure. Yeah. One other thing to note on this team for the people that like to place wagers on games, I think they're 5-2 against the spread. Something to note. Good teams win, great teams cover, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, and you got a game against William & Mary this Tuesday, and I'm going to say the spread is probably going to be pretty generous.
I'd say if I had to guess, it's probably 17.5.
Well, I was gonna say I was looking ahead for the people that aren't degenerates out there and gonna bet on NC State versus William & Mary and look at Pittsburgh. That one's probably gonna be a pretty generous spread in favor of NC State, or where it's probably like 7.5, 8, where you don't really know a ton about the teams that are playing at this point, and that's probably gonna be some free money in favor of NC State if they're able to win that game.
Yeah, and just to for perspective on that, Pitt plays Northwestern tomorrow in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Northwestern is a 9.5 point favorite at home.
Whew. So, Brian, you're still muted. Hold on.
Sorry, guys. Turns out you got to have the microphone on. But yes, Ken Palm has State as a 21-point favorite over William & Mary and an 11-point favorite over Pittsburgh. And then Bart Torvik's site has State as a 20-point favorite over William & Mary and a 12-point favorite over at home to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, we'll see if Vegas follows suit on either one of those, or they're just like, we don't know enough about these teams. Mm-hmm. NC State was really bad last year, blah blah blah. So we'll see where things stand once those lines come out. But all right, guys, I think we'll just about wrap this one up. Thank you, Brian and Miles. I appreciate both of you for jumping on, guys.
No doubt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun.
All right, we'll be doing these more often in the near future. Do some post-game podcasts as well, just because now we're getting into truly basketball season, and I know everybody's excited for that. It's Christmas season, but it's also real basketball season, which is a lot more fun. So thank you to everybody for listening. We will talk to you again soon.